Okay, we're at 2:02, so we'll kick things off now. Thank you everyone for coming today, for attending our State of the Industry update. Today we'll be talking about all things electrification. I'm joined by Ekotrope Product Manager David Pedrick, who will be leading the discussion today. And so we'll go through electrification, and feel free to, as we're going through things, leave any comments in the chat and any questions. And at the end, we'll circle back and go through all of those and answer any questions you might have. And that being said, I'll pass things off to David.
All right, thanks, Sarah. Welcome to the webinar, this quarterly webinar. This is the end of Q3 here, and we have been really excited with how these have been going and the attendance of these. I think this is our fourth one, so we've done a full year. And if you want to watch any of the previous ones, they're all on YouTube, as well as a number of other videos that we produce about the state of the industry and the residential home market and how those homes are being built. Today, we are going to be talking about electrification. And before we dive into that, I'm going to give a little bit of a background on Ekotrope. We have kind of a unique audience this week or this quarter with lots of home energy raters, but also lots of utilities in the audience to learn a little bit about what one utility rebate program is doing in Massachusetts that we're going to talk about later. That's quite interesting in electrification. And of course, electrification is very interesting to those utilities because of our homes using natural gas utilities or electric utilities, and kind of where that's moving and changing across the country. So a little bit about Ekotrope first, and a little bit about the agenda here as well. So we'll do an introduction to Ekotrope. We'll define kind of what we're talking about with electrification and why it matters. Then we'll dive into the data to show what new homes are doing in the sense of what electric appliances and mechanical systems they're using. Compare that to some survey data of not just new homes, but all homes in the US. We'll talk about a utility electrification case study, and then also wrap up with some question and answer and what this means for you. So Ekotrope, we're your source for technology solutions to advance sustainable residential construction. We have a platform that processes about 300,000 new homes per year, and that platform helps calculate utility rebates, energy consumption, tax incentives, as well as generating the HERS index for those homes. And so far, we've processed about 1.3 million homes to date in the history of our company. And we provide these services to home energy raters, like many of you, utility companies, building product manufacturers, and home builders are now also receiving some of this data on our platform, so they can better track which of their homes earn tax credits and which do not. That way they can really optimize and maximize the value they're getting out of the home energy rating network, as well as our software. So one of the main uses of our software is also the 45L report. And just a little kind of bit on that, the IRS did write their new rules for the 45L. So we now have clarity on what documentation builders need to have in their hand to claim that tax credit. So we're busy writing a blog to kind of announce that the IRS has provided that clarification that we've eagerly been waiting on, and we'll be happy to share that in a blog here in the next couple days. Another thing that Ekotrope is doing is we also support over 50 utility programs. So homeowner or home builders and home energy raters can submit for utility program applications directly in app and get the feedback if they pass or fail in app as well, to streamline that process. So that's a little bit about Ekotrope. We're going to transition into talking about home electrification. Why does it matter, and what's the process being made or progress being made for electrification? So we thought it was important to define electrification because electrification is a process. It's a process towards a home using only electricity in the home and no other fuel sources. So breaking this down for that process of one, all electric, and that means appliances, heating systems, cooling systems, and hot water systems use electricity rather than burning a fossil fuel. Of course, electricity is not 100% clean, so it's not like it's not burning any fossil fuels, but not burning any fossil fuels at the home itself. Then we also are defining partial electric. And so this is where maybe the heating system has been electrified, but they're still using gas on the stove. And we're using 3 different categories here to see when we look at the data, are there any leading or trailing indicators of like a state or a region trending towards electrification? And so maybe the hot water system is the last system to transition over to electric utility. So we define these 3 categories that we'll talk about throughout this presentation. One is the heating and cooling HVAC system is partially electrified, meaning they use a heat pump, but they don't use hot water and they don't use electricity for hot water or appliances. The other category is hot water electrification. So they've just done that, but gas in the other 2 places. And then the third is the combination of both. They use HVAC as well as hot water for their, I'll use electric sources for those 2 categories. We'll talk about those throughout here, and we just want to kind of level set here, make sure we're all talking about the same thing. So why does electrification matter? So the kind of number one and number 2 reasons are environmental and health impacts. So there's obviously, we're all working towards reducing global carbon emissions. And one way to do that is for homes to use more electricity than fossil fuels. Of course, our electricity grid isn't 100% clean energy. And that's kind of a whole nother issue here. But in order to reduce carbon emissions, we have to get to electric utilities, and then the electric utilities and our electric generation has to get cleaner as well. So with all hands on deck at this point, it's doing both of those in parallel so that we don't, convert everything to clean solar or clean generation, but then we're still using gas in our homes. We're trying to do both of those at the same time, in order to optimize the speed at which that transition can be made. The other piece of electrification is indoor air quality. There's lots of conversation, particularly in the last year, about all of the particulate matter and the indoor air quality issues that come along with burning fossil fuels in your home. Electric appliances don't produce those same indoor air quality hazards. Cooking still has, boiling water and cooking things still produce indoor air quality issues, but you don't have the problem of incomplete combustion, carbon monoxide, or those other exhaust fuels coming off of your combustion equipment that you have in a house. So those are kind of the 2 primary reasons, motivators of why we're talking about electrification. But then kind of once that's motivation is established, then there's state and local goals and mandates to try and speed that along. So then that starts to change like the business paradigm. Okay, why do we need to pay attention to this? Because there's opportunity there, and there's also market demand. Homeowners are asking about these things as well. So we have kind of the primary cause, and then states and local governments are saying, hey, let's have policies about this. The national government also has goals about how to do this, and that all gets represented in these policies. And those policies may be incentives. We're going to talk about some incentives, particularly in Massachusetts, about how a state has enacted a policy with a really lucrative incentive to encourage electrification. Some of the places that saw this first was Eugene, Oregon, had the first ban on gas use in new buildings. And we're seeing this happen more, particularly in New York and New York City, that we'll talk about here as well. So for global CO2 emissions, it's important, and we're going to add a little bit of context here, because building operations do represent about 28% of CO2 emissions by this sector. And so this is, we need to reduce the CO2 emissions in the building operations so we can make homes more efficient, and we can also make the fuel that they consume cleaner. And if we switch to electric fuel, then that fuel source can become cleaner. There's easy ways that we're working, world is working to build a cleaner electric generation. So where is this happening? We've compiled this list here of highlighting states that either have a city in the state that has an all electric mandate, or has a state net zero or electric goal, or it has, I gotta hide my notes here, a state that has a partial mandate or a complete mandate, or something that's in progress. And so we can see a couple states here that we really want to focus on that we can talk about a little bit in more detail here. And those states are going to be New York, which has a electric mandate, in the New York City as well. But we also want to look at states like Washington and Oregon, because they're going to be interesting when we start looking at the electricity rates that we've observed in our data. So these are kind of places where they're at the front end and the leading edge of the electrification process, and places where we would expect to see really fast increases in electrification based on their intentions to change that, kind of speed that process up. And it'll be interesting to see kind of, do we see that actually bear out in the data moving forward? So that's where states have started to implement programs and requirements. There's also a few goals set by the federal government that is kind of increasing the need to pay attention to electrification. One is from the Biden administration and the Federal Sustainability Plan, which is to hit net zero emissions in the building sector by 2045. And we're going to look at kind of that time horizon here in some of our data. Or programs like the Architecture 2030 Challenge, which is zero by 2030. But then there's also some key programs and incentives that are pushing this process along as well, not just by setting a goal, but saying, hey, let's put some money behind this goal. And in the Inflation Reduction Act, there was the Home Electrification and Appliance Rebate Program, which can give up to $14,000 per year for electric appliances and home electrification. We're going to talk a lot about the Mass Save program, where in Massachusetts, new homes can earn up to $40,000 if they're all electric and meet some other requirements. And then there's programs like the utility program, Duke Energy Progress, and then non-mandatory programs like Energy Star Next Gen, which is a version of Energy Star that requires all electric appliances and heating and cooling sources in the home. So with that, with all of this attention, we wanted to see what is actually happening. We know there's a lot of focus on this. We know that it's been a flashpoint in the news. When we were preparing for this, I was looking in Google Trends to see when electrification, the word, started to take off, when heat pump started to be used more. And it was interesting because we could see it slowly trending upwards, and we see a huge spike from earlier this year when it was in the news that there were states starting to ban gas in homes. And so we could see that it did catch the national attention for a little bit. And particularly in Massachusetts, we could also see that when their Mass Save program kicked off, that all of a sudden heat pump became a very popular word to search in Massachusetts. So with all this attention, we wanted to see, is progress being made? Is it changing quickly? Our expectation was that it is, and we wanted to check this out because there's a lot of reasons, and we really want to see electrification for all of the climate and indoor air quality benefits it can have. And it's always good to have a check to measure ourselves and see if we're making progress towards these goals. So to do that, we pulled together some data from the Energy Information Agency, EIA. They do a residential energy consumption survey where they survey homeowners and probably renters as well to see what energy they use in their home. So this is all homes, existing homes, recently built homes, kind of everything. So it's a cross sector of where we stand nationally. Then we also pulled data from our database of recently built homes. So we can think of the EIA data as the baseline. Where are we today? And the Ekotrope data is looking at recent data to see where we are starting to move into and where we're going, to see if we are making progress. The data that we looked at in our database was from 2020 to recent data, and to understand where electrification is happening, the rate that it's changing. So we're going to talk about that. Then we're going to transition into talking about the trend lines. Where do we see electrification changing? Kind of the first takeaway is that overall there is slow, steady electrification. And two, that some states have seen a bump in 2023, while others are kind of still staying at that slow growth rate. And but unfortunately, most states aren't changing very much. And three, we're going to look at kind of mass save case study, and we're going to see that electrification growth in Massachusetts it really is strongly correlated with that implementation of the new all electric incentive program. So we'll see that it really did change quite a lot. And I realized I kind of swallowed the lead there with the first point. Electrification rates in existing homes, so those homes that we consider the baseline, generally do exceed that of new HERS rated homes. And while we were preparing this, that was a little shocking to us. We're going to dive into kind of where that is, and we'll start to talk about some potential explanations here. So first off, here is electrification rates for existing homes. This data comes from the Energy Information Agency, and the greenish colors means higher levels of electrification, and the dark blue colors mean lower levels of electrification. And this is only looking at all electric homes, right? So the portion of the homes in this state which only use electricity. And when we look at this, we see some interesting patterns. One, Vermont and New Mexico, not enough data there to show, so they're grayed out. But we see Florida, very electric, which kind of makes sense. They probably don't have too many heating systems, which would be a primary place to use fossil fuels. And so kind of makes sense that there's a lot of homes there that are all electric. Other interesting places are Oregon and Washington. Lots of electric homes up there, mild climates, but also very cheap electricity because of lots of hydroelectric power up there. So that may be causing some of those decisions by consumers up there. Otherwise, we have kind of the Sun Belt, milder temperatures, more electricity. Interesting, North Dakota kind of fits in with the rest of those. So that's an interesting piece of data there. And California, lots of non-electrified homes. So the next slide, we're going to show kind of what recent homes are doing. And we'll see that we have similar patterns. We have the Southeast, very electric, other than South Carolina, interestingly. And New Mexico is pretty good. Arizona is pretty good. And New Hampshire and Connecticut are also kind of standing out a little bit. We have some states here in gray because there's not many HERS rated homes in those states. So we didn't feel like it represented a good subset of, or a good sample of the homes built in those states. So we excluded those from here. But you can see that there's, places in the South are still much more electrified than places in the north, even California as well. So this slide is going to show the difference. So if we think about the baseline here is existing homes, then we have newly built Ekotrope rated homes, and then we have, this is the combination of them. So this is looking at what is the difference between Ekotrope and the baseline. So we'll see that the green ones indicate that new homes are more electrified than the baseline, than the existing homes, and blue is the opposite. So we'll see here that like Georgia is electrifying homes much more than their baseline. West Virginia, Kentucky, Tennessee, Connecticut, and New Hampshire. While the rest of the states, particularly South Carolina, is kind of trending the opposite direction. And so this is interesting. We're starting to see what the differences of these states are and seeing kind of why this happens. So one piece, one thought and one theory where we had about kind of the existing home versus new home difference is that for a while, the natural gas industry had lots of had a boom in prices dropped really quickly, so it was really enticing to heat your home with natural gas, so it became much more popular. And so if that happened for a long time, and that happened a while ago, those homes are still around and kind of built that case to not electrify those homes. And that actually happened fairly recently, right? So those homes, we kind of had that surge in popularity in natural gas, which is where we are now. And now we're cutting those down and switching them back to electrified homes, where many years ago, that boom hadn't happened yet. And so you're thinking about like market share here. So like decades ago, natural gas had small market share. And then for a while they grew their market share to where they're now. And now they're starting to lose a little bit as we're starting to be a little bit more aware of this electrification trend and this need to electrify. So that's kind of what our theory is that historical natural gas wasn't super popular. So we had a lot of electrified homes, then that slowly dwindled. And now we're coming back where electrification is becoming a little bit more popular and it's trending upwards just a little bit. But how much is it trending is an important question here, particularly if our goals are for 2045 or sooner to have more electric homes built. So here is looking at all of the recently built homes in the Ekotrope HERS rating database and determining how many of them are all electric or one of those other categories of partially electrified. The dark blue at the top just uses electric water heater. The light blue it uses a heat pump. The light yellow is the combination of using both a heat pump and electric water heater. And the dark green is all electric. So if we look at the trend from 2020, where this data starts, till today, where this data ends, we see that all electric homes are increasing by a little over 1% each year. So from around 18% to around 21, 22%. So year over year, we're trending upwards. It's not exceptionally quick, but there is a trend upwards in terms of electrification. And when we look at this, they all line up very closely. So it doesn't look like there's any lagging or leading indicator here of like, okay, once this starts to go up, people start to make the decision. They all correlated very closely and they all look very similar here. So we want to dive into a few states to see kind of what the differences are and how these both and where states are exceeding expectations or exceeding the normal. And the first three states that showed consistent growth when we're doing this analysis was Arizona, Kentucky, and West Virginia. And which is interesting to us. None of these states have policies around this this case, but we did see a consistent growth in all categories for these states. West Virginia and Kentucky, particularly West Virginia, their home building market's dominated by a couple really big builders, so maybe there's a little influence there. But overall, these states kind of saw good, steady growth of electrification, unlike most of the other states. But if we're just looking at pieces of equipment, we wanted to highlight that if we're only looking at electric water heater growth, Colorado and Nebraska are really the leaders of the pack here, where they've seen really rapid growth of electric water heaters. And so you can see this, Colorado's gone from single digits percentages to over a quarter of their homes are using electric water heaters. And for Nebraska, starting around 25%, going up well over 50% towards 60% using electric water heaters. So if we're looking at just not just overall trend, but just recent changes, we had 4 leaders here of states that are seeing recent changes. So this is like recent in the last less than recent year, basically. And these 4 states, Delaware, Massachusetts, Nevada, and South Carolina, have all seen that recent bump in the last year and a half, maybe 2 years, which shows that maybe something's going on here. And there actually is something going on in Massachusetts that we'll talk about here in a little bit that's really exciting. But otherwise, these other 3 states are kind of leading the pack. And okay, is there a shift here? And if you look at some of the leaders in this space, like Rewiring America, which is a nonprofit that advocates for electrification, they talk a lot about the curve and the change that happens where the early adopters start to move and you have this S-curve shaped adoption cycle where they start to take off and then the rest of the mainstream comes along before you start to plateau at kind of your peak. So perhaps these are the early adopters that are starting to move here in electrification. So with that, we're going to dive into Massachusetts here and talk about the Mass Save Electric Home Incentive. And to give a little bit of kind of context around this program, there's 2 levels. Both require all electric HVAC, hot water, and appliances. There's some HERS index score requirements here, but for single family home, it can earn up to $15,000. For a 4-unit dwelling, they can earn up to $40,000. So it's quite lucrative to go all electric in the Mass Save program. So given this program, we'd expect to see some change in electrification. And looking at our data, it helps that this is HERS requirement. We can see that when the program went into effect, which was around January 2022, we can see a real change in the rate of homes being all electric in our data. And you can see that almost in the first half year, it jumped from 10% to 20% all electric. And then it kind of plateaued a little bit, and then it's maybe picking up again. So it's like the early adopters really jumped at the opportunity. And then it took maybe a few months for the rest of the folks to be like, oh, this is really great. This is a really good incentive. Let's learn how to do it. And now it might be taking off again. We'll see as we kind of keep monitoring electrification here. So this is a really interesting example of what an incentive can do for electrification through the Mass Save program. And we'll talk about what this would look like on a national scale if this same pattern happened nationally. And we're going to talk about that here because we wanted to talk about what is our general electrification rate across the United States and how is that changing, kind of what the trajectory would look like or would need to look like to hit some of the 2040 timelines. And this chart right here shows kind of our current electrification rate projection. This is the green line. It's squiggly because it's showing kind of It's not a straight line path. There's going to be fluctuations in it. This is mimicking the fluctuations that we've seen in the past. So at the current rate, we're currently growing at about 1.2% of homes are becoming all electric each year, year over year. And so if we extend that out to 2045, 2050, that gets us to about 50% of homes are all electric, which is below the 100% benchmark that some people are putting out there, which is much lower than where we would like to be. To actually be at 100% by that same timeline, we need to see about 3.7% growth. So we wanted to look at, okay, this is what the national level is. How does the Massachusetts Mass Save program fit into this? And if we add in the Mass Save line here, Mass Save actually is hitting that growth rate of getting to 100% electric homes before 2045. We'll see kind of how that trend continues. It's early in Mass Save, but at this point, looking at from 2020 to 2023, that growth rate is at that same level that is needed to hit that 100% electric timeline by 2045, which is super exciting and super interesting to see. Like, one state has put a lot of money out there and thinks they have a solution that is getting them to their goal of electrification. And we're able to kind of see the data here in real time. So some of the key takeaways here is that on the national scale, there's been a lot of buzz about electrification, but the rate is still growing somewhat slowly among HERS rated homes, about 1.2% each year, like we saw in the data just recently. Additionally, over the past 3 years, each state is still below their new homes. The rate their new homes are built to be 100% electric is still lower than the average in that state. So as they increase the homes being built all electric, they'll eventually surpass kind of the rate of their average, but they're not there yet, and it's going to take some time to get there. And the states that saw the biggest jumps in electrification are the states that started with very few homes. So they had kind of started small and now are growing quickly, which is kind of a small number bias a little bit. But some other key takeaways here is that like I said earlier, partial electrification and complete electrification trends are very strongly correlated. But unfortunately, partial electrification is not necessarily a leading indicator towards complete. So we can't use that as an indicator that people are starting to go towards all electric. However, it's still good data to understand where people are using particular equipment systems to target, okay, if we want to get to all electric, should we target a individual piece of equipment because we know people are still using that, or should it be a whole home electrification policy? Finally, we were just showing in Massachusetts that incentive programs can help, particularly lucrative ones that offer $15,000 for all electric home. So a little bit more summary here in strategy. So builders and raters, there's a lot of benefits to marketing new high performance accolades like Energy Star Next Gen for builders to use. A lot of raters are using language that Sam Rashkin kind of has popularized a lot of, talking about electric appliances are the modern high tech, using technology invented in this century rather than last century kind of ethos, and thinking that you should build for the future and using current technology rather than using last year's technology for your home that's going to be operating for the next 40, 50, 60 years. Also, learning the incentives that are out there is super important. The Mass Save program is one example of that, but there's a lot of other significant incentives that we process for utility programs to incentivize electric construction, as well as individual mechanical system incentives as well. There's also lots of cities that are considering requiring or banning gas in construction. So following that's really, really important. And there's good sources out there as well to see that of which states, because there are advocacy groups pushing for this right now. And finally, home buyer demand. Ultimately, this is going to be a big piece of it as well. And we've seen that there has been lots of interest in this, particularly when it became a flashpoint earlier this year, and everybody started worrying, looking up induction stoves, and actually being surprised because induction stoves are actually much better and are incredible pieces of technology that cook better than a gas or standard electric stove do. And so home buyer demand is going to start changing this over the years as well. So what else can builders and raters do to prepare is one is understanding like-for-like replacements for equipment efficiency that result in similar performance and rebate compliance at various price points. So like if your builder comes to you and says, I want to switch to an electric such and such, knowing what efficiency, what type of product you can recommend to them that is price competitive with what they're installing today is going to be really important to them, and helping them prioritize upgrading which appliances and high energy use systems they can switch to still achieve their goals. Like we were talking about, programs are always going to be important here, and using the tools that are available to you to build this plan for them so they can react to it and be prepared for any changes in policy or codes or market demand that they can have, so they can build a plan to meet those tax credits, those utility codes, utility programs, and still meet their HERS score goals that they have, and meet code compliance is going to be really important to them. So helping them build that plan and seeing what that roadmap can look like is super helpful for builders and raters as well. And finally, building product manufacturers who see this, there's growing demand for electrification, especially in the states where there's mandates and goals or forecasts for mandates. And so getting on the leading edge there of showing how you can build homes and what that means for the consumer and what that means for indoor air quality and energy performance is going to be really important to make that an easier process for them and make them excited to make that shift. Whether that's for the end consumer and indoor air quality and utility bills to make them excited about that, or ESG requirements for the builder. Being able to talk about those things and talk about the value of those is really important to kind of ease that transition and even encourage the transition a little bit faster. And finally, for utilities, there's like Mass Save, there's been lots of success there, having a huge impact to switch people to all electric. And so continuing to do that is continuing to find ways to encourage that is super helpful for utilities, especially, I should qualify, electric utilities here. And electric utilities could be seen as a key ally for states and cities that are trying to encourage electrification here. And there's some key policy alignment and incentive alignment that can happen between states that are trying to electrify along with electric utilities. So with that, I want to thank you for everybody for attending. We have some time for question and answer here. We see some questions here already, but if you have any questions, please contact us. If there's any topics you'd like to learn more about, we're happy to field those requests and see if they can fit into a future State of the Industry webinar. And we're always looking for interesting topics to present on, and interesting ways that this data can be used to help the industry grow, as well as speed up goals like electrification across the country. And so with that, I'm going to bring in Sarah here to help facilitate the questions, and we will open it up for those questions.
All righty. Thank you, David. Lots of good information there. I think there's some really exciting opportunities for stakeholders in the market to kind of get ahead of the electrification trend and kind of across the board get themselves prepared. So being said, we have some questions in the chat. I see a couple of them popping up already. One that a few people have asked is about the presentation slides. I just want to let you guys know that we will be sending this presentation out after both the recording and the slides. So if you'd like to review after the fact, you'll be getting that soon. And then starting off on some questions as far as the content in the presentation goes. One question we have here is, how does electrification affect the CO2 index score? David, can you provide any kind of insight on that?
Yeah, so the CO2 index is a new index generated by ResNet that, like the HERS index, is a integer score that represents how much CO2 emissions this home is responsible for. And this is just operational CO2 emissions, not embodied CO2. The calculation of the score looks at kind of the region's utility grid that the home is located in, and has a projection of what the CO2 emissions of that utility is over the next 30 years. And so once the calculation does that, it then sums up the CO2 emitted for that home compared to a reference home over that 30 years, and the index is the division of those two. So 0 would be 0 emissions compared to the reference, and 100 would be the same amount of emissions compared to the reference. And by going all electric, you take away all of the CO2 emissions that the home is responsible for on the site of the home. So any CO2 emissions from a gas furnace or a gas water heater now are removed, but they're replaced with the CO2 emissions of the utility grid that home is connected to. And the utility grid, I don't think there's any utility grid in the world or in the country anymore that is 100% fossil fuels. They all have a portfolio that is made up of natural gas and coal, nuclear, wind and solar, hydro, and others. And as that natural gas portion and coal portion decrease, your CO2 decreases as well, which benefits the CO2 index, as well as benefits the CO2 operational CO2 of that home. So by converting to electric, you're now plugged into the system that you're going to get credit for those increased renewable uses on the utility scale.
Awesome. Thank you, David. Just scrolling through here, kind of a clarification, I suppose, on the water heater data we presented. Do you happen to have any insight on whether we were segmenting or distinguishing between heat pump water heaters versus typical electric resistance water heaters as far as the trends that we saw go?
Yeah, so we were showing a little bit of both. All right, so we're just showing electric water heaters. We do have data on the prevalence of electric water heater, standard resistance water heaters compared to heat pump water heaters. For this conversation of just electrification, we chose to just look at whether or not it was an electric heater. We aggregated both standard and heat pump. Obviously, heat pump water heaters are much more efficient than standard resistance heaters, and there's lots of incentives for that, and we're big fans of those as well. So it's a good point that those are better for everyone in the long run, but in this sense, we were just looking to see if it was all electric. That's kind of the balance of, we need to both make the homes more efficient, but also convert them to electric at the same time. and there's a balance point in there someplace that gets us to our CO2 goals the fastest. And where that balance point is above my responsibility. But somebody needs to, at this point, we're racing as fast as we can in both areas. Well, maybe not as fast as we can, but we need to be racing as fast as we can in both areas.
Great. Thank you for that clarification, David. We have another question here about Mass Save and the all electric program. Are there any specific rules or resources that you can kind of point to that made the program especially effective? I kind of think especially so quickly.
That's a good question. I think first off, being based on the HERS index builds gives it a good opportunity for success because there's built-in knowledgeable, trained people to participate in the program. You're not creating new certifications that people have to jump through to figure it out. You can plug and play. These people know what they're doing, and the program can get off and running really quickly. I think the other thing that really is helpful there is $15,000 to $40,000 is a good amount of money for a home builder. And one, it catches the attention. So people are like, oh, $40,000, that's a lot. Let's go check it out. So it gains their attention, and then they can follow up from there.
Awesome. Thank you. It looks like that's pretty much all the questions we had, at least that I can see, unless there's any kind of last minute question coming in now. But that being said, thank you all for joining today and for attending and for asking those questions. We hope you enjoyed today's session and that you learned a lot. I know I certainly did. I think there's a lot of interesting aspects going on here, and there's some big opportunities ahead. So yeah, thank you so much for joining. Thank you to David for presenting all that information. And like I said before, this will be available, the recording as well as the slides, if you want to review them. And feel free to reach out to us at info@ekotrope.com and ask any further questions you might have. We'd be happy to shed a little more light on things. So yeah, thank you so much, guys, and have a great rest of your day.